Hi everybody, thanks for connecting with me again today. So we're continuing our series where we're looking at places, 5 different places where Jesus talked to his disciples, and today we're going to see he talks to a larger crowd about the fact that he's going to die. And each time Jesus reveals something about his character. So we've talked previously about his character of love, and it comes out in humility and in service, those kinds of things. Today, we're going to read from John 10:11, well, a larger section, but where Jesus says that I am the good shepherd, and he talks about his death, in the context of that. So we'll see what we can learn about Jesus and learn about ourselves in the process. Okay, so it's really important for us to view John 10 about Jesus saying, I am the good shepherd. It's important to view that in the context of John 9, because John 9 happens at the same time as Jesus' words in John 10. So here's the backstory before we get to what Jesus said, I am the good shepherd in John 10. In John 9, Jesus heals this guy who has been blind since birth. He was born blind. And this is a really significant miracle because Jesus' miracles are getting more and more significant as John progresses. And this is a really significant miracle. It's close to the end of Jesus' life. And it becomes a real problem for the Pharisees, for the religious leaders. And so the religious leaders, after he heals this guy, they get into an argument with Jesus. And the religious leaders are really scrambling to try to find some reason why, Jesus can't be from God, right? And here's the summary of their argument. They say that Jesus can't be from God because he's a sinner. Okay, well, why do they say he's a sinner? Because he healed this guy on the Sabbath. Right? So the Sabbath, it was a 24-hour period that was really important to the Jewish people and still is today. 24-hour period from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown where they were to rest and not do any work, right? Which is a great thing. But Jesus healed the guy on the Sabbath. And so the best argument that they could come up with is Jesus can't be from God because he's a sinner, because he broke the rules. He broke the Sabbath rule and he healed the guy on the Sabbath, right? And I love kind of the punchline of this whole John 9 chapter is in John 9, verse 25, where the guy who was healed says that, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not. Like, the guy's been dragged into this argument, and he's like, I don't know, like, don't ask me. But the man replied, but here's what he said, but I do know that I was blind, and now I see. Right? The guy's like, I don't know about all this stuff you're talking about. All I do know is I was once blind and now I can see, right? And this kind of speaks to me. Quick little aside here. This speaks to me because, many people have different views of who Jesus is and different views on kind of church and religion and that whole thing. And at the end of the day, all I know is the difference that Jesus has made in my life, right? He's made a radical change in my life, and that's all I know, that's all I need to know, kind of thing. So anyways, that's kind of the punchline, and that's where the guy landed. Again, verse 25, I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but I know this, I was blind, and now I can see. But anyways, so out of this healing and out of this argument, you're a sinner because you broke the Sabbath rule. Out of this, then Jesus goes into what we now kind of have separated into John 10. And he talks about a shepherd and his sheep, right? He goes into this long kind of discussion about a shepherd and its sheep and his sheep. And there are 2 groups of people that Jesus is talking to when he's talking about a shepherd and his sheep. The first group of people is the religious leaders, the religious elite, the Pharisees, right? And he's saying to the people, don't trust these guys because they're thieves and robbers. In John 10, verse 1, Jesus speaking, now I tell you the truth. Anyone who sneaks over the wall of the sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. And make no mistake about it, Jesus was talking about the religious leaders and the religious system, right? And he's saying to the people, don't trust these guys because they're thieves and robbers. And then later in verse 10, Jesus says the famous words, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy, but my purpose is to give them rich and satisfying life. Jesus is saying here that this whole religious system, all these rules, it steals, it kills, it destroys. And don't trust these guys because they're thieves and robbers. Okay? So that's the first group that Jesus is talking to as a direct result of this argument in John 9. He's condemning the religious leaders, and he's condemning the religious system that they have created, right? And then the second group, and really who Jesus was talking to, was his followers, right? So again, in this section, there's a condemnation of the religious leaders, but there's a word of encouragement and love and guidance and protection for Jesus's followers. So let's go on and read. I'll go back to the beginning of verse 1 in John 10. I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of the sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. Again, referring to the religious leaders. But the one, referring to himself, the one, Jesus, who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep, this is important, the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. That's a reoccurring theme in this whole section. The sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And then skipping down to verse 9, yes, Jesus said, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. And Jesus is saying that I am the only way, the way, the truth, and the life. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and find good pastures. Good pastures. Verse 10, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. But my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. And now he's going into talking about his death. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for his sheep. And then skipping down to verse 16, I have other sheep too that are not of this, that are not in this sheepfold. And Jesus is talking about us, non-Jewish people, right? He's saying he's talking to Jewish people at the moment. But he's saying that there are others, there are non-Jewish people that are not in this sheepfold, and I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd, Jews and non-Jews. The Father, verse 17, the Father loves me because, now this is important, this is Jesus talking specifically about his death. The Father loves me because I sacrifice my life so that I may take it back again. He's talking about his death and his resurrection. I sacrifice my life so I may take it back again. No one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily. So in other words, Jesus is saying, I am in complete control. Nobody is, even though they're going to kill me on the cross, nobody is taking my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily, for I have the authority to lay it down when I want to and also take it up again, for this is what my Father has commanded. So, Jesus here is speaking to his followers, to his children, to his sheep, right? And there's a lot that's packed into this. I won't talk a lot about Jesus's prediction of his death and resurrection, because we've talked a fair amount about that in the previous weeks, but that certainly is a big part of what Jesus is saying here, that I am going to die. But let me draw a couple of observations that relate to each other. First, I want to talk about the role of the shepherd, the job, the task of the shepherd is to protect and to provide for his sheep, his or her sheep, the role of the shepherd, and then also our role, secondly, of knowing and understanding, listening to the voice of the shepherd, okay? But first of all, let's talk about the shepherd. This imagery of a shepherd would have been immediately recognizable by the people, right? Jesus is talking to people that it was very common to see, a shepherd with their sheep out in the fields, much like when we drive down the road out in the country. It's very common for us to see, cattle in the field, or to see sheep in the field, or whatever, This was a very common imagery, and for a shepherd to be out there, it's very common. But also biblically, it was a very common imagery. This idea of God being, the shepherd of his sheep, specifically the children of Israel. David in Psalm 23, he said, the Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. I love that New Living Translation. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. Why? Because the Lord, God provides for me and he protects me, right? So there's this central image of a shepherd as a protector and a provider. A protector and a provider. And we see this in the language of Jesus bringing the sheep into a sheepfold, a pen. Sometimes that would have been a cave, and other times like a man-made kind of pen to protect the sheep from wolves or whatever. And this is a very common image for the shepherd to be a protector and a provider. Now the thing is that we are the sheep in the story, right? And the imagery suggests that we sheep are not very smart, and that we sheep really depend on somebody to protect us and to provide for us, right? And, honestly, that goes against our modern ideas of self. We think of ourselves as as strong, as capable, as intelligent. We're able to provide for ourselves, right? That we have this imagery of ourselves of being strong and capable and quite able, but we are the sheep in the story. And this actually goes back to our discussion last week when Jesus brought a child into the circle. And he says, unless you become like this child, right, then you can't enter the kingdom of God. And in the same way, a child depends on a parent for provision, for protection. Can you imagine a baby being born or a little toddler being born and being sent out into the world to protect themselves, provide for themselves? They just couldn't do it, right? And so in the same way, a child needs a provider and a protector. In the same way, a sheep or a little lamb or whatever needs a provider and a protector. So we are the sheep in the story. We are the child in the story. And in one way, this insults our modern view of ourselves as strong and capable. But in another way, it's a beautiful image because, friends, I have experienced, and I'm sure you have experienced as well, that sometimes life gets messy. And sometimes life, things happen that are outside of my control. And sometimes I need somebody who's bigger than myself, as strong and capable as I think I am. Sometimes I need somebody who's bigger than myself that I can look to, right? And this is a beautiful image that Jesus is saying, I will take care of you. And in fact, remember, this is in the context of Jesus is getting very close to the cross. He's getting very close to the worst fears of the disciples taking place, right? And I'm reading between the lines a little bit here, but Jesus is kind of, and I'm taking some liberties, but Jesus is kind of saying, things are going to get really bad for you, disciples, followers of mine. Things are going to get really bad. And, last week we talked about how, they didn't want to know the answer because they were afraid of the answer. Here, my phone, 2 weeks in a row, my phone going off. They didn't want to know the answer because they were afraid of the answer. They were afraid of what they knew was coming. And Jesus is saying, make no mistake about it. It's going to get really bad. Oh my goodness, this person is persistent. It's going to get really bad. But listen, here's the point. Even if your worst fears come to pass, you're going to be okay. Let me say it again. Even if, and I'm speaking to you and I today, even if our worst fear comes to pass, we're going to be okay. Even if the disciples' worst fear of Jesus, their leader, being killed and brutally killed, it's going to be okay. Even if our worst fears come to pass, it's going to be okay. Why? Because we have somebody who's bigger and more powerful than us, who is our provider and our protector. But friends, I want to finish in the last couple of minutes by talking about what I think is the key to this whole thing. There are like 5 or 6 times when Jesus says that if you know, that my sheep know my voice, my sheep listen to me. He kept saying that over and over again, right? The key to coming under the protection and the provision of our shepherd, Jesus, is that we know his voice. We're able to listen to him, pay attention to him, and actually obey what he says. If we carry this, carry this analogy on, if the shepherd has a little lamb and the lamb isn't smart enough to know and the lamb runs off right out of the flock and nobody sees the lamb, go, then that lamb is no longer under the covering, under the protection, the provision of the shepherd, right? And the lamb is vulnerable to a wolf or whatever, and we see this imagery again in the 99 and the one who left the fold. When the lamb wanders away, it's not under the protection. And the key to being under the protection and the provision of Jesus is to be able to listen to and understand the voice of Jesus. On Sunday when we get together, we're going to have a conversation about what does that actually look like? It sounds nice to hear the voice of God, to hear the voice of Jesus and listen, but what actually does that look like, and how do we actually do that? And so maybe on Sunday we'll have a conversation around, what are some practical things that we can do? Maybe it's in quietly meditating, reading God's word, meditating on the word, having a quiet moment to talk to Jesus and to listen, develop that inner voice, But what are the things that we can do? And not just in, that 15 minutes or 30 or whatever we might set aside in a day, but how can I have a posture all day long of listening to the voice of the shepherd, right? So how do we actually do that? So this idea of Jesus as the shepherd, our protector, our provider, but it only works if we learn to listen to, pay attention to, and obey the voice of the shepherd. Okay, so that's my thought for the day. And so got to go. My time is up. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. God bless you, friends.